Hi folks, welcome to this session which will guide you through your group project submission, which is due shortly, and it's related to your selection project, which is the second part of the group project that you started last month. So now, you remember we did the recruitment piece. So in other words, you had people applying to your job, okay? And now what we've done in the selection part is we've actually had some applicants apply to the job, and what you need to do is select an appropriate candidate and defend your recommendation on who you're going to hire. So if you want to know where that is, you'll notice I'm hovering here over the group project, part B, which is due on this date, and it's in your table of contents section. So if I click that, I get here what the project's about and the resumes of the people that have applied. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to open the selection document here, which is going to describe what you have to do for the project. All right, so what we've said here is to use the job description for the position that you developed your ad for, okay? And we want you first of all to choose 6 selection criterion. So what I've done is I've actually got the job description here, all right? So you may want to make sure you have that in front of you, okay, with all the duties and responsibilities. And this area here in the job specifications is what you're going to use to help you develop your selection criteria, because this is what you're saying: the education they have to have, the knowledge they need to have, the experience, and any special skills and abilities appropriate for that job. So you want to make sure you hire people that have all these things. So what I've done here, I don't know if it's going to, how much help it's going to be to you, but I thought I'd kind of give you a Cliff Notes version of what you need to do. So use the job description to develop your 6 selection criteria or standards for the job or the qualifications. And again, I'm telling you to use the job specification area of the description, which we've just shown you is in here. All right. So now, basically all we're looking for here is on what basis or what are the attributes that the candidate's going to have in order to get screened into the competition. Okay, what we want you to do is to list and describe each selection criteria. And again, we only want you to choose your top 6 criteria. Explain what information on the resume. Don't forget, we have the resumes here for all the candidates. I'm not going to open them up. But you remember here, we do have the resumes for all those candidates, right, in your course. So when you go through the resumes, explain what information on the resume might indicate that the applicant satisfies the criteria. Why does the group feel that that's an important selection, an important qualification for the position? Because you have many you can select from, but you guys as a group have to decide on your top 6. Be specific in your description of each selection criteria. So don't say, oh, I'm not going to choose this person because they didn't list references, or I'm not going to choose this person because I don't like the way they formatted the resume, or they're willing to relocate or not as a criteria, because that's not really in your job specification, right? So you want to make sure that you're picking criteria that match the specification. Then what we want you to do is to review the applicants who responded to your ad from part A, and you'll remember that you did that, okay? And again, the resumes and the cover letters are all posted again here in your eLearn course. All right? So now, if we go up there, what we want you to do is, now that you have your criteria, you're going to have to set up a scoring matrix or a table that identifies the selection criteria that you guys chose as the top 6, right? And add comment, and add a comment section on the bottom. Now, if you're looking for an example of what the matrix might look like, I'm highlighting the word sample here because I don't want you to take that word for word. Their matrix is really for a different job. It's for an administrative assistant, not an assistant manager. Your position is going to supervise people. You know, this is not necessarily going to do that. So if you look, you'll notice on the criteria that they've selected, they've separated the must-have criteria, which is usually specified in your education and experience area, and then the wants. So we've got the musts, and the wants, which are sometimes the nice-to-haves, right? So if you guys are finding some wants or some nice-to-haves that you think is important, that's perfect. Now you'll notice, and so you need to include your top 6 criterion, okay, in this matrix. Now notice that they've weighted each criterion. So if you look, you'll notice that, for example, in the wants section, they've said, well, keyboarding is really important, so I'm going to give it a weight of 10, right? And then I'm looking at a score of 9, okay, that you scored, all right? So if the weight's 10 and the score is 9, okay, then the weighted score is 90. The weight times the actual score, right? So we're kind of getting like a weighted score, all right? So notice we're only doing it for the ones in the wants area, and that's because those are things that you'd like to have but aren't absolute necessities. In terms of the education and experience, you want them all, so their weights should all be 100%, right? So they either meet that criteria or they don't in the must section, but the wants you can wait, all right? We want you to make 8 copies of your scoring table and include that in your Word document that you drop into the Dropbox, because the 8 are for each person that applied. So each person requires a worksheet, a matrix, okay? Okay, so again, you complete a scoring matrix for each applicant or a scoring table for each one. And at the bottom of each one, okay, we want you to put some comments in there. Things like why the applicant received a certain score for each of the criteria. Like if there's something that you want to tell us more about. Like if you rated somebody really low, much lower than you're rating other people, like tell us why you gave them either really low or really high. But you don't have to justify absolutely every score. What we want you to do then is identify, based on the score, the 2 applicants that you chose for an interview and provide any rationale, okay, for selecting the candidate. And again, your rationale needs to refer back to the selection criteria and how they met the criteria. So in essence, what you could do is you can in essence say, here are my top 2 candidates with a final score of, whatever they scored. In this case, if you go back to the sample matrix, it's 440. But if that was a top score, or if your person had a top score, that's great to screen them in. But any candidate, any of those 2 candidates that you recommend, they all have to meet the must-have criteria, right? You can't not meet the musts, even if they get a high score on the wants. Okay? So now what we need to do, the next thing you need to do is develop an interview plan. So you have to kind of play the role of the HR person here now, and you have to write up an introduction. So when each candidate comes in for an interview, what will you say to them? You'd want to welcome them, tell them a little bit about the job, the company, and include some rapport building questions. Like, for example, would you like a cup of coffee, have a glass of water? Do you have any questions before we begin? That kind of thing. And then again, you have to come up with a series of questions that you would ask. And we're asking for a minimum of 15 questions, but we want some of them to be behavioral questions and situational questions. And we talked about this in our last class, all right, or when we did the selection chapter. So I say see part B of the assignment. So if we just go in there for a moment, you'll notice here that we're asking you for the questions to include, the questions you submitted were 10 marks. So we want 15 questions, okay, and at least 3 well-written behavioral ones and at least 3 well-written situational ones. So if you're not sure about the difference between behavioral and situational, you can Google it, or you can go back to our course slides where we describe them for you. Okay. Then what we want you to do, if you go back here, is, now those are only going to be 3 behavioral, 3 situational. You can add other questions that you think are relevant. The only thing that I would caution you here is don't come up with questions where they can just be yes or no answers. We want the interview panel to be able to discriminate, one candidate's answers from another. So if you just ask them yes or no kind of questions, then it might be a little bit challenging for people on the selection panel to actually decide who's getting what, or how you're gonna judge their answers. And then a conclusion. We want you to come up or write to us what the conclusion would be. So thank the applicant perhaps for taking the time to come in and see you. Let them know what the next steps are in the selection process, and ask them if they have any questions. Okay? Now, one thing you'll notice here in your description of Part B of the project, okay, is that we not only describe what we've talked about here, but we also give you a rubric and tell you what you need to submit. So we tell you for each of the selection criteria, each one is going to be worth 3 marks for a total of 18 marks, and what we're looking for in the criteria, as well as your scoring matrix, and 1 for each applicant. So we want a blank form from you, so your master copy of the matrix, as well as your matrix for each person, which gives your score as well as your point form comments. All right, we want you to identify your top 2 candidates with rationale, which is 4 marks, and then your interview plan, which includes your introduction, your questions, and again your conclusions, all of which we've kind of described to you in here. Your introduction, your questions, and your conclusions. So this concludes a summary of the requirements for Part B of your group project selection.